My name is Betty Gaedtke. I am a proud member of the Quapaw Nation. I am a Quapaw potter, and I'm happy to share with you guys today. Donna said something about this being very casual, and I took her at her word. So we're just gonna, I am not a good speaker. I've never been a good speaker, but I'm pretty good around friends. And y'all look like you're pretty friendly. I know a lot of you, so let's just get this started. So what I'm going to talk about today is the Quapaw and their pottery. The Quapaws were known for their pottery. They made some exquisite pottery, and it is highly sought out in today's market, which I don't like, but still. So what I want to talk about is the Quapaws maybe 500 or 600 years ago. Not today, current day, because I want you to just kind of look at the table, and I want to try and take you back to a time when they were probably sitting on the riverbank or under a tree, on a hide or something. The women taught their children, the girls, how to do the pottery, and the men taught the boys how to hunt. The women took care of the fields. The women took care of raising the children. The women took care of taking care of all the household needs. Makes you wonder what the men did, huh? So, with that being said, I just want to start by saying that we did not have any kind of Walmarts or craft stores, back then. So everything that the Quapaws used for their pottery was of nature. And some of the pottery that they made were also of nature, as far as making animal effigy vessels, human effigy vessels, and of course just the plain red or white. A lot of the things that the Quapaws used. Can you still hear me? Kind of? Well, I can't hear me, so. One of the things that the Quapaws used for temper was mussel or shells, and they used a lot of, and of course this would be a good example, they would take and probably mash it into as much of the powder as they could probably get out of it. And a good example would be something like this. So it makes you wonder what kind of tools they used back then. Well, they had hammers. This would be a hammer, big old rock, and that is probably something that they would grind some of these materials into. And of course the shell would have to be cooked on a low fire. It is really, really easy to overcook a piece of pottery with mussel in it. I've done it multiple times. They do not last. They will crumple over time. So the Quapaws mastered that, and I have a couple times. So, it is something that I want to bring to our studio up on the hill so that we can learn all of this the old way. Some of the things that they would have used would have been maybe something like an old, I saw your face. It's just like, what is that? So this is just old corn cobs, and several years ago, down around the Arkansas Post, I picked these up. And they may have actually been used years ago. Probably not, but maybe. Another thing that the Quapaws would use, they used everything imaginable. These are bear claws. Those would be a really great tool to incise one of your vessels. And when I say to incise it, it would be something like this, where you just, take a sharp tool and you draw on your pottery before you fire it. So there was a lot of that. Another tool would be antlers. Just work a little bit on the tip of that, and that would be also a really great tool to do incising with. Here's some more shell that has been crunched up. This has not been heated up yet, but also another tool that they would have used would be something like this shell. This would be a tool that you could actually decorate. It could give you straight lines in your vessel, something like feathers. That would have been something that they would have used as a tool possibly 500 or 600 years ago. So to start with, let's see if I can get back here to my area. You can tell I don't do well with microphones. There we go. Maybe I can just leave it set now. So what I'm going to talk about today is just the different stages of clay. There's not a lot you can do with this short amount of time, and I certainly can't do a vessel from start to finish. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about what they would have done 500 years ago. And of course, if you're going to do anything in clay, you have to start with some clay. And they did not have any clay sources, so they had to go out and dig the clay. And because, you know, the Quapaws are the downstream people, we always hug the rivers, so they had an abundance of clay. So this clay has just been dug out of the ground. All I've done so far is let it dry out. I tried to pick out the debris. You know, there's sticks and bugs and rock, all kinds of stuff in the clay. So we need to clean that out and process the clay. So if you would start with a big clump, you want to break it down. I've got this one into small pieces. And then I would add water to that. And I would let that clay completely dissolve, and that brings you to the stage of slip. Let me just stir this a little bit. This is actually set up a little bit. It's not as slurry as I wanted it to be, but you can see that it's thin enough where you could use it for, number one, you could actually use it for glue. When you put 2 layers of clay together, you want to do a technique called scoring, which is basically just roughing up the clay and just, you know, scraping it, making it rough, and then it would be a good idea to put something like this in between, because this would act as a glue for your clay. So we call this stage 2. So once you get the slurping, you can't do anything as far as building a vessel until you take some of the moisture out of it. So porcupine does that, sitting it in the sun does that, doesn't take very long. And then you will get a piece of clay that is more like this. You know, it's still very pliable, so you would not be able to build an entire vessel at this stage of your clay, but this is what we call the plastic stage. So when you add your water, add your temper, you could actually let this sit for a little while. And people get kind of freaked out. I think I got some of that on me. So this is processed clay, and if you look in here, it looks kind of gross actually, because it's got a fair amount of mold in it, which in my early days, I would dump that immediately because it's moldy. Well, turns out the more mold, the better your clay is. So you can let moldy clay sit for a while, and it actually increases the quality of that clay. I shouldn't do this. So there's water on the top of this, and we're going to drain that off eventually because I kind of let it stir back together. So I'm just going to go down in this a little bit. And you can see the beautiful clay at the bottom of this. So if I was ready to process this, I would simply take the lid off this and let it sit outside until some of that water evaporated and try and get it to this consistency. So, all right, I'm going to set this down here. So now we're to the plastic stage. And one of the things about the Quapaws, we were coil builders back in the day. So what we would do is take a piece of clay that is processed. This is not a very pretty noodle, but it doesn't matter. And so we would I would always score every piece, which is scuff up the edges. See here. And I would also do this piece as well. Scuff that up. And then I would just start making a circle. go ahead and do a couple of these. And I have never been known to do a perfect pot with people looking at me. Doubt if today's going to be any different. So then we'll just add another coil. Even though you run out of space, it doesn't matter. This is very wet. One more before I start pulling them together. Alright. So now we just want to make all of these coils into one piece. So we're just simply going to take our thumb and pull the clay down. We want to do that all the way around. Just keep pulling it down, and eventually it's all going to be attached. When you do it on the outside, you've also got to do it on the inside. So I'm just going to pull it down. We just want to mend all these walls. By the way, we are getting ready to start our classes again up on the hill. So if anybody's interested in joining in on some pottery classes, get a hold of Patty Billings at the library, and she will put you on a list. In the past, we've had quite a list, so not everybody gets to take them all at once, but we try to give everybody like a year so that you just don't come and take one class and then, you know, you don't get the opportunity to, you know, play and get used to the feel of it and bring out your artistic side, you know, so. So this is a long way from being.
What's your age limit?
Well, you have to be an adult for the adult class, although we are talking about doing some classes for young people, you know. Yesterday we did 12 young kids, you know, with the Quapaw camp, and, you know, I got to tell you, they're pretty amazing. I've done lots of elder classes, and I have found the older we get, the more afraid we are to make mistakes. And kids don't have that problem. You know, they don't mind jumping off the cliff. And it is hilarious to see what they come up with. And it's just fun to watch them be that brave. All right. So, just looking at some of these tools, one of the tools that I would be drawn to would be something like this. It's a sharp tool. That would be a great scraper. And so, just pull your clay up and let's try and make these walls one piece. It takes a little bit of time. It's very therapeutic. You can usually solve most of the world's problems while you're sitting here smoothing out your clay. I've solved so many world problems, but nobody listens. All right, so same way with the inside. Now, something like gourds would be a great tool. And there were plenty of gourds back then because, as we know, the Quapaw people were agricultural people. So we had, you know, we had our corn, our beans, our squash, you know, and so we didn't throw anything away. We used everything. Like I lived back there. So this is just a gourd on a stick, and it would have been maybe just a tree branch, you know, for all I know. And everything's speculation because, as you know, the Quapaws did not write our history down. We passed it along from generation to generation. And we have lost a lot of our ways through losing people in our tribe, possibly through smallpox because we lost large numbers. And so a lot of our ways went to the grave. So, which is one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be part of this today. You know, just to talk about the Quapaws back then. You know, one of the things we were really known for was our pottery. And we were also known for basket weaving. And, you know, we're not doing any of that today. But this is something that has always been really dear to me. I have always wanted to learn Quapaw pottery. And when I was younger, you know, I had a family, I was working, I lived 150 miles up the road, that didn't help. And so those elders that were teaching years ago, I missed out on that. So when I retired, first thing I wanted to do was start taking Quapaw pottery lessons. And I realized we don't have anybody doing it anymore. And we should desperately try to keep that tradition alive, in my opinion. So, all right, so sometimes we get to talking and not working. But you can see how that would smooth out the inside of your bowl, and you just keep making it larger and larger. You know, clay sticks to everything. So if you wanted to put it in, you know, some kind of a vessel, you would have to put a barrier between it. And back then, they did not have plastic. So this would have been a great tool. It's just a deer hide, it's wet, and it's very pliable, so that would be a good barrier between your vessel. All right, so I'm gonna go one more row on here, and then we'll move on to the next stage, because obviously this is not the end of it. And again, if this clay wasn't so wet, I would definitely be putting some slip on it, which would be this right here. All right, so now I'm going to leave it in this vessel and just kind of use it for my base. And again, just like before, I'm pulling it down. And again, you have to do it on the inside. And these walls are pretty thick. I definitely would thin that down when I'm not sitting in front of 50 people. All right. Another thing that the Quapaws, I believe that they did, I think they were paddlers. You know, you can save a lot of time using the paddle and manipulate your clay. Doesn't look too pretty right now. Oh, let me get a different one. No, let me use the other side. Since I made this error, you can actually put a pattern in your paddles, and then, of course, you know, when you hit it, you put the texture on your clay. So a lot of the time, the Quapaws would use baskets for their texture, and some of them are, and by the way, any of these books that you would look at, all of these have some type of Quapaw pottery in them, or Mississippian pottery. And when they say Mississippian pottery, it could be Caddo pottery or Osage pottery. So, it's just, you know, you can completely change the shape of the vessel. And I'm a big supporter of paddling. And again, you want to smooth out the inside. It's just as important as the outside. You know, the rougher the inside of your vessel is, especially if you're going to be using it, you know, to eat out of, you definitely want to even your clay out, make it as smooth as possible. You might even want to come back and do what we call burnishing. And it gives your vessel a very smooth texture, and it would probably help it to be just a little more food safe, although, you know, today they say the stuff is not food safe, but I guarantee you, the Quapaws used it, you know, what else are they going to eat on, you know? That was pretty food safe. I do think, however, because they have not found Dawn dish soap yet. So I do think that they probably rinse their dishes in probably in the river or a creek or whatever. And then they would put it back on the fire and get it hot enough to where it sterilized everything. So they had a way to get around it. And of course, to make it, because it is porous, it's a low fire clay, so it is porous. One of the things that I think that they did was, burnish to keep that in, and then they would put some kind of waterproofing on it. So the Quapaws were big in bear grease. That would be probably a good guess that that's what they would seal their vessels with that many years ago. And again, it makes salmonella come to mind. But I think they addressed that issue. And all right, so he's not beautiful. That's true. Good point. Just seal this a little more. Another tool that I think that the Quapaws would have possibly used, it's just like, I've made buckskin dresses before, and the first one that I did, I'm so proud of it, and I took it to one of our elders. I actually took it to Ardina Moore, and because I have industrial sewing machines, I thought, man, I can cut this down. I can cut this time in half even, because I have industrial machines. So I sewed my buckskin together on an industrial sewing machine, and I took it to Ardina Moore, and she looked at my stitching, and she said, that's not acceptable. So you need to go home, and you need to rip all that out, and you need to start over. And oh, by the way, you can only sew your stitches halfway through the hide. So that made it so much harder than that sewing machine. So tools are everything. So when you do a buckskin dress, I actually have a little purse that's got my tools in it. And I think it was the same way with the pottery. I think that they made tools, and that's what these are. I have different sizes. I have some that don't even have a handle on it, and that would be something that I would want to get up under a rim to smooth out. And so they utilized everything. All right, so I'm going to put this guy back in here, and that was just to show off the little coil work. So he's not going to become beautiful for you today, so don't expect it, okay? I'm just going to put him over here out of the way. We're done with him until I get home. So after you make the vessel the way that you want to make it, then you need to let it set and come to what we call the leather hard stage. And that would be this stage right here. Now, I could break this in front of you, but it is such a long way from being dry. But this would be the time that you would consider possibly decorating your vessel. And there's several different ways that you could do it. If you just look at the books that I have here in front of you, you can see they were really big on the red and the white. So the Nodina red and white, the Quapaws were actually known for. And there was no other tribes that were doing the red and white. So if you actually came across a piece with the red and white and it had a swirl on it, or the swastika looking thing, that would definitely be a Quapaw vessel. So, and they stand out from some of the other tribes because we are exclusive in that. So this would be the time when you would take this leather hard stage and you would want to do something with it. Now, maybe you don't want to decorate it with slip, because that's what they decorated with. They would paint their vessels with slip. So they would just take a different colored clay, grind it to a powder, add water to it, and they could just paint it on. So, I brought everything except a paintbrush. So what I'm going to share with you is that's okay, because, they didn't have paintbrushes back then. But what they did have, they would hand make possibly a paintbrush out of I don't know, the tail of something or the hair of something, you know, and maybe just tie it onto a stick so that they could, you know, just use it for a paintbrush. So because I don't have one, I'm not going to be able to share that with you, which, you know, that's fine. But so this is the stage where also if you wanted to do what we call incising. So here's some examples. These are broken pieces of pottery. And by the way, this is another thing that the Quapaws used as timber. And muscle is really great to use, but grog is even better. So grog is clay or vessels that didn't make it out of the fire in one piece. So what they would do is just crunch them back up, grind it back down, put it in clay for the next time around, and it would make your vessel harder. It would help your vessel from shrinking, which is where most of your cracking comes from. So it would be, you know, these are fantastic. Also, these give you an idea of some incising. You want to just look at that and pass it around? And just look at some of the detail. And what they did is they just used a sharp tool, probably something as simple as maybe deer antlers, and they would just draw into the clay, just like you're drawing on paper. And then when you fire this, actually a lot of the black settles into your design and it makes it show up a lot more. So another thing that possibly would have been a good tool would be bear claws. We all know they had plenty of those. Here's another one. So, and who knows, maybe the hair off that bear would be a great paintbrush. So one of the things that they would have used would possibly be a feather. You know, that would make a great pencil or incising tool. Also, sometimes they would do texture. This one might be too far gone to do texture because I might hit it and it might be in pieces, but you know, yeah, it's too hard for that. But this would have been a good tool, you know, to paddle it and put a texture on it. So, and how they would come across something like this, they would just go and take a branch, a small branch off a bush or whatever, and you would strip that down. And then you would take the strings off that and put them in water, and then they're very pliable. Then you just do a twisting braid while it's wet. And when it dries, you've got something like this. And then you would take some kind of wooden anything, and you would wrap it while it's wet. And as tight as you can wrap it. And then when it dries, it shrinks in, and it's just really hard. And that makes a great tool to give texture to your vessels. When you get finished and you've decorated your vessel as much as you want to decorate it, you can get, you know, like these right here in front of me. I don't have a lot of inventory. I'm working on a order right now, so this is all I have at the moment. But these are fired, and again, this is, you know, what the Quapaws are known for, is their red and white. They also use black, which a lot of it over the years has disappeared off some of our ancient pottery, but you can see a little bit of sign of the black. So, but the red and white are very, very prevalent. This one I have not put into a fire yet, but when I do, it's going to completely change the look of it. It's going to turn this white a much darker white, or more of an antique looking white. And I do that because I really want people to stop buying our pottery on the black market, because we all know that all these vessels come out of our graves. And so Mississippian pottery is so collectible, and it goes for such a high amount of money. And I want to encourage people to stop buying that and buy something that is more current, that is not coming out of the grave, that's being robbed. And that's really important to me. So let's see. some of the, well, I forgot the burnishing technique, and if you don't burnish it, you're not gonna have that really pretty shine. You know, in today's clay, we have a whole line of different glazes. You know, we have high fire, which I don't deal in, but we have high fire that would be food safe in today's, you know, standards. But back then, 500 years ago, can you imagine? I always think of it like, kind of like a sewing bee, where you're all sitting around making a quilt. You know, you're doing fellowship, you're talking about current events, you know, who's getting married, who's having a baby, you know, what war we just won. You know, we took out Chickasaws, you know, because we always talk about the Chickasaws being at war with the Chickasaws. I got over it though. So they would sit there and just talk and probably teach their, you know, the girls and talk about what's going on, maybe what's going on with the kids, just anything and everything, you know, because it is kind of a fellowship. And, you know, when you come up to my pottery classes, there's no such thing as a quiet class. Are we all just going on and on about our lives and laughing and joking and just enjoying everybody's company? And all the while, you know, we're burnishing this vessel, you know, and the more we burnish it, I don't know if you might have to come up, you know, and look at this separately, but it's taking on a real sheen. And it's also pushing the clay, especially clay that's got grog in it or muscle in it. It's a form of pushing that back into your vessel. It's also giving it, it's making it more stable, but mostly it's giving it a beautiful shine. Now, we all know that, well, we don't all know, but you cannot sit here and do this in an hour and expect to have a vessel beautiful. You know, you probably ought to sit there all evening watching TV for hours while you're doing this, you know, because the more you burnish your vessel, the better it's going to come out. And it will even add to the food safe, you know, because when you're pushing this clay in, especially on the inside, you know, that's the smoothness that you're looking for. So again, we just keep burnishing and burnishing and burnishing. So, you burnish a minute and send it on. And now remember, this stage.
You didn't say it right that easy.
Such a good lesson. I was just about to say, be careful. This stage is a very delicate stage.
Very.
You know, so you just go. No, you go right ahead and burnish and send it on. And I just really want everybody to see how shiny it makes the vessel. So. So when you get it to that point, you're ready to pretty much let it finish drying and then go into the fire. So when it comes out of the fire, it's going to sound more like this. So it does a chemical reaction in the fire, and it makes it a stable vessel to be used however you want it to be. This one I would call a water bottle. This one here, believe it or not, the Quapaws did lots and lots of teapots. They did them in all different shapes and sizes. They took after turtles, buffalo, bear, wolf, I mean, whatever came to mind. And if you notice, this guy has got a weird little smile on his face. And I think that the Quapaws had a real sense of humor, even back then. And you know we do today. I mean, we make fun of everybody all the time. So, you know, we have no problem laughing at your expense. That's just who we are. It's just fun. We don't mean anything by it. You know, and it's just a form of having a good time. And it shows up in a lot of the Quapaw pottery. So, all right, now this one is going to be a little different. The Quapaws didn't do a lot of this, but they certainly did some of it. So this vessel has been fired, so, you know, he's definitely could be used today. Well, they did this other technique that we don't talk about very much. And it took me a while before I actually...
We're decorating. We're just decorating.
I'm not keeping it. Just go ahead and enjoy
We're
it. Throw it
decorating.
down.
We're
pass it
safe,
on.
we're
We're
safe
making a
in it.
unique lid that's on it.
Yeah.
We're safe in a plate.
Yeah, there you go. When we're done, we'll just see what it looks like in the end. No problem. I did not make that vehicle, that vessel to save, so not a problem. So this has been fired, and then I came back after I fired it, and the slip that we were talking about, I made some slip out of obviously a different color, because I wanted to be able to see the design that I'm putting on it. So I just took a paintbrush and I put this design on. Now, this is incomplete because I wanted to show it to you at this stage. So you put this in the fire and you let all of this do whatever it's going to do, turn darker brown, and then you take, after it's finished, you go and you scrub this off with water. Because this is just slip. It's never been fired. So when you put this on at this stage, it will stick to your pot. But when you take all of this off, it's called a reverse smoke technique. It's just the coolest thing. Because when you wash this off, this is all that's going to show. You know, everything else is going to be smoky and dark, and it's just going to really make this pop. So when I do finish this, I will certainly show it to anybody that wants to see it. But I wanted to talk about this technique because, like I said, they didn't do a lot of it, but there are definitely ancient pottery that shows that this technique was done. And I recently got the opportunity to go with the business committee up to Indiana to the Angel Mound, and we did a repatriation. And one of the things that just got my heart was, of course, they laid lots of pottery out on the floor of that grave. And they had some of the reverse smoke technique among that pottery. And it was just so exciting to see that. And it's just, I mean, you could do anything you wanted, whatever your heart desired. You paint that on here, and it's going to be on here after you smoke it. So I just wanted to share that. Obviously, lots of boards. I think that a couple of these, obviously I bought, but I love the shape of them because that would have been a great mold to possibly put clay on and paddles, you know. And one of the things that they had to use besides the hides is wood ash. So if you took and sprinkled this on something, oh, I didn't need that back. That would keep the clay from sticking. So, and then of course you just brush it off, or when you put it into the fire, it just goes away. It burns off. So, okay. So, are you still following me? Is there anybody that has any questions? Obviously, when we get to the end, we're gonna have this vessel, you know, and that's the goal. So, for this little demonstration, I guess we're done. So, but I would recommend, if anybody is interested in pottery, any one of these books are fantastic. These people loved. Well, this is one of my favorite. I haven't even talked about the head pots. You know, there was only like 124 or 27 head pots that are even in existence today. And all of them came from a specific area. And you know, the Quapaws came down through the boot hills, and all of the head pots that we have found that are in existence today was in that general area, probably within, I'd say 50 miles for sure, but maybe even 75 miles. So we haven't found any head pots anywhere else except in that area. But the Quapaws did head pots for sure. And again, anybody that wants to come up here and breeze through these books, you're feel free to do so. So, any questions?
How long does it take from start to beginning? Just that bowl, if you want.
Well, the thing about pottery is you cannot do it all in one sitting because the clay is wet. So you would have to start a vessel and let it set, possibly get to the leather hard stage, and then come back and add to it. So when I do stuff like the effigy pots, it takes me probably a week to get it put together, and then you've got probably another week of drying time, you know, and before you fire it. So it's not something you can do, you know, overnight. So
I'm guessing you use a kiln. Probably.
I do both. Yes, I
How
have
did
a
they do
kiln.
it then? Were they just a
Oh,
fire?
they did
build
a
it?
pit fire, of course, yeah. As a matter of fact, I mean, I have some videos of doing some firings on the ground. And the last one I did, the flames were like taller than I was. It really was huge. And so the kiln is today's way of doing pottery. Back then, they had no other way except, you know, a pit fire. You could either do it on the ground, or you could dig a pit and you could do it in the pit. You know, the survival ratio is not as good as in a kiln, you know, because you have all kinds of interference as far as, you know, maybe it's windy, maybe it's really cold. You know, if you let a vessel cool down too fast, you're going to break it. So, you know, it's a process.
Do they have ways of protecting it from the flame, or they?
Oh, they could. Actually, they could probably put rocks around a pit, and that would keep, you know, the wind from hitting it directly. Just like every other thing, when the fire and all the ashes fall down on top of it, you want to walk away from it. You want to let it sit and come down very slowly as far as the heat. Because if they get shocked, it's going to cause a break, or at least a crack. So. And then when they got through with their vessel and they got it the way they want, I am not through with these, so I have not done that technique. But, you know, I talked about the bear grease. So the last thing that I would do is put some kind of grease of some sort on here to make it waterproof. And it really does work. If you took this vessel, even though it looks pretty shiny, if I took that vessel and put water in it, and I took a vessel that I had put some kind of grease on it, you could use Crisco if you want to, you know. So just anything that's going to give it that waterproof. And it does matter, because you will find water on your table eventually if you don't do that. So, because it's porous, and eventually it works its way through.
What do you get bear grease?
Well, I don't use bear grease. I'm talking, we're 500 years ago.
Okay, gotcha.
So that would be something that they
What
would
about
have
buffalo?
used. Yeah. Or buffalo, you know. Actually, buffalo is a little greasy. But no, actually, bear is the greasy. So the Quapaws actually sold bear grease by lots. I mean, big containers. So that would probably be the grease of choice. I mean, like I said, we don't know anything for sure because we didn't write it down. But just from what we have handed down from generation to generation, you know, these are things that make sense. Some of it we know for sure, some of it's just speculation. You know, so.
Do you have to do anything to it after you put the grease, or just let it dry?
Nope, once you put the grease on, now I do come back and buff, you know, give it that little bit of extra shine. So, but no, once you put the grease on it, you're done.
Is the white just a different type of clay, or do you do something to it to make it whiter?
Well, there's so many different kinds of colors of clay. So I just deal in the white and the red right now. And so, you know, this isn't even going to look like this color when I pull it out of the fire. It's going to completely change the overall look in it. And, you know, I do not go out of my way. I don't stress if my vessels aren't perfect. I mean, I do a little bit, but I've gotten over it because, you know what, we're not perfect people. And there's a lot of, I grew up, my grandmother used to say, you know, so what that it's not perfect? We're not perfect. God says that, you know, God says we're perfect in His eye, but I make mistakes and I just move on from it. I don't trap it, although I do have, you know, my flower beds are full of pottery that I wasn't happy with, but, you know, but it's just, you know, it's just part of life. So
do you buy all your clay, or do you?
no,
Or your own?
no, I will go out, I have bought clay and I do buy clay, you know, but I have also went out and I have dug clay out of the ground. I have went through the process, and let me tell you, that is a class all by itself. It's not easy to do, it's pretty labor intensive. So But yeah, you go dig this clay out of the ground, and there's a whole process of getting all the bugs,
It'd be kind of neat though,
and,
like some of it
roots,
on
and
top of
everything
your
out of
cutting.
it. So,
Should cut some of them out.
any questions? Any other questions?
Very well done, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Very good.
All right, well, you're free to come out and touch if you like.
She was talking on the phone. Thank you.